Hello, people! Alex here, and guess what book we're talking about today? No prizes for guessing right because it's in the title. It's Dune. For some reason, I imagine like the Inception trailer sound effect whenever I say that, like, it's Dune. This video was supposed to be out a few weeks ago, but this book is complicated and I wanted to do it justice in my review. You'll find hundreds, maybe thousands of videos on YouTube talking about Dune. So why should you watch this one? Well, let me tell you a little bit about yourself. You've heard of Dune before. Somewhere in the cultural zeitgeist you've come across this book. Maybe you've heard it's the greatest science fiction novel ever written. Maybe you've considered reading it. But for whatever reason, you've never gotten round to it. Then you hear Denis Villeneuve is making a Dune movie and a lot of people are very excited. But you still haven't read the book. Then the movie trailer comes out and you think, that looks pretty cool. So now you're wondering if it's finally time to check out the book before the movie comes out sometime in 2035. And so now, here you are. Did I get any of that right? Probably not, I was trying to be clever. Either way, just keep watching because we're going to answer 3 questions in this video. Should you read Dune? Is it the greatest science fiction novel ever written? And what sort of person will actually like this book? Let's try to figure out all of those answers with my very own 4-point review. If you watched my other videos, then you know the spiel. I'll split the video into 4 categories and I'm going to use those to talk about the book in more depth. Timestamps in the description. At the end, we'll summarize and try to answer those questions. Obviously, no spoilers because we're trying to figure out if this book is worth the read. Without further ado, number 1, The World of Dune. Some parts of this book made me so thirsty. I mean for water, get your mind out of the gutter. Let me explain why. The primary location in Dune are the dunes of a desert, as in Dune is set on a desert planet called Arrakis, also known as Dune. I'm saying Dune too many times and now it doesn't sound like a real word. This is a real hostile environment to live in because it wasn't designed for humans. I love the universe building in Dune. It's very realistically designed with a lot of time spent thinking about how humanity would survive on a planet where it doesn't rain. This applies to everything from the still suits they wear to travel around, to their homes, to their modes of water collection, as well as more cultural aspects like their currencies and their language and their religion. It all comes together brilliantly to create a super immersive world that you really want to explore. Also, the stiflingly oppressive heat and its brutality really comes through in the writing. There's the repeated mentions of water too, and its scarcity is emphasized constantly by the repeated mentions of its significance on the lives of these people. I had a whole new appreciation for the bottle of water in my room while I was reading this. There's also those massive worms that you might have heard of already. Those are pretty epic in scope and you feel that in the writing as well as in the reactions of those characters when they see one. It's one of the things I'm most excited to see in the movie. There's so much more to the world building of Dune than just the planet. Arrakis just acts as the battleground for a much larger story. So in this world, a long time ago, there was a revolution called the Butlerian Jihad, where all the thinking machines were destroyed. So really strangely for a science fiction novel, these people don't use computers. This creates a really unique world because these people don't really fight with lasers and blasters like you would expect in a science fiction book. They fight with swords and shields and knives, but these kind of things are old and new at the same time, and it's a really great mixture of the old styles of fantasy and the new style of sort of sci-fi weaponry, and it's just a great unique mixture that I really liked. Also, because they don't have computers, they have these super smart groups of people called the Mentats, who are basically human computers. There's also the Bene Gesserit, who are these really clever women with such deep understanding of human emotions that they basically have superpowers. None of this is explained outright at the start of the book. Frank Herbert sort of just casually mentions this stuff, and it's up to you as the reader to figure out the background of all of this. I was okay with this to an extent because it's nice to not be spoon-fed world building. But all of it is very confusing for a while. The start of the book has a lot of detailed world building that you just kind of have to power through to make sense of the story. But do you know how I know that the world building in this book is fantastic? After finishing Dune, I spent a lot of hours watching Quinn's ideas and all of his videos on Dune lore to find out everything else about this place. Every casual mention of an event has a larger story behind it in this book, and you feel that as you read it. The depth of world building in this is honestly amazing. No wonder there's like a billion Dune books after this that go into everything else about this world. The design of the universe of Dune makes me feel like this is the Lord of the Rings of the science fiction genre, and that is the highest praise I can give any book. Number 2, the strange writing style. This book is really weirdly written. Or maybe I just have a really narrow reading experience. For the sake of my ego, let's assume it's a former. Most books I've read in the past few months, or I suppose years, have had a POV character. Usually there's like a handful of them. These characters act as lenses for us to see the story through, and the point of view switches between them at the end of chapters or in each sections of a chapter. In Dune, you still have point of view characters, except everyone you meet is one and it switches between them constantly. In a conversation between two people, you see through the minds of both of them. It's a strange third-person, omnipresent, yet focused point of view style of writing. It took some getting used to. The story definitely warrants this kind of writing, which I understood after a while. There's some really cool set pieces of intellect where that kind of writing makes it feel really badass and drives home exactly how epic what's happening is. Those are usually to do with Paul Atreides and Lady Jessica. I also love that kind of writing because it's dripping with the author's voice. Sometimes when you read a book, it feels pretty standard. The writing isn't necessarily bland, but there's nothing special about it either. In Dune, the word choices and the sentence structures and the paragraph structures make this very clear that this is a book by Frank Herbert. The writing style is very analytical and sometimes very dispassionate. Don't get me wrong, characters do have strong emotions in this book, but the writing itself isn't very emotive. This has a lot to do with the type of world they live in and their specific way of thinking. I really appreciated this unique writing style, and it was really enjoyable once I got used to it, because no one else would write it this way. Usually, if it's warranted, I have a section of the review to talk about action in a book, but Dune doesn't have a lot of action, so let's just talk about it in this part. In the scenes where you would expect heavy action writing, Frank Herbert doesn't really focus on it a lot. The fighting and the violence mostly happens in the background or at a distance. I don't have a particular problem with this or anything. The author just doesn't give a lot of importance to action scenes and so just doesn't write much about them. I just wanted to mention it because if you are someone who does enjoy grand epic fights in science fiction or fantasy books, this won't necessarily give you that. The fights that we do have though are, again, very analytical, just like the writing. And this is one of those times when the writing really complements the book. Imagine sort of like the action in the Sherlock Holmes movies with Robert Downey Jr. There's a lot of time thinking about moves and combos before actually doing anything. I thought that was really cool, and it was a really unique style of fighting I hadn't really seen before. I just wish we got more of that particular style in this book. Number 3, the characters. I already said that pretty much everyone in this book is a point of view character, but there's a couple of big ones. One of them is Paul Atreides, the son of Duke Leto Atreides. We spent a lot of time with him and his mother, Lady Jessica. Out of these two, I cared more about Lady Jessica, but that's not saying much. The analytical, dispassionate style of writing meant that I found it very difficult to relate to any of these characters. Their struggles and hopes and dreams just felt too large or distant for me. And the things they were talking about just felt too grandiose. The blurb for this book said that this was an inspiration for The Matrix and Ender's Game, and I can see why. It's not that I didn't like them or thought they were badly written characters. I was just apathetic towards them. This wasn't a problem at the start. I really cared about all of them when they were being introduced. I was really invested in some of the relationships between the main players. It was sort of halfway through Act 2 when some stuff happens, and I realized that I was sort of drifting away from them. Or maybe they started drifting away from me. Either way, when some stuff happens to them and when the plot moves forward for them, I cared only in the sense that I was invested in the story. I wasn't personally bothered by what happened to them as people. If you watched any of my other videos, then you'll know how disappointing that is for me. Characters are usually the thing I care about the most in a story, and if it's the same for you, then you might have a problem with this book. There were 2 characters I actually liked though. One is the villain Baron Harkonnen, who was pretty great as an antagonist. He was smart and menacing and conniving in the most perfect way. At a couple of occasions it does get a bit cartoony, but for the most part he's a pretty great bad guy. The other one is Duke Leto Atreides. He's Paul's father and was by far the most relatable guy in the book. He's noble and he's caring and he just wants to do the best for his house and his family. He doesn't really have character arc in the book. He's a stable character who's already developed into his final version when we see him at the beginning. But that's okay too, and he was the only character that I was personally invested in. Number 4, the story structure. Let's finally just talk about the organization of the story. It's split into 3 parts, which basically act as the Act 1, 2 and 3 of the book. The premise of the book is great and there's a lot of great universe building, like I said earlier. The characters have some interesting personalities and their interactions are great. It felt so real, like they were deeply rooted in well-known relationships between them. By Act 2, I was expecting to love this book. The story that I imagined it would be sounded really cool. But it didn't do that. The story sets up a lot of stakes in the first half, and then removes most of them very quickly. By the end, which came too quickly by the way, I felt barely any worry for the protagonists. Everything worked out too easily for my taste. This could be seen as a feature of the story and the world building. I understand how it's related to some of the themes and messages of this book. For example, there's a thing called the Missionaria Protectiva, which is related to prophecies created by the Bene Gesserit people. It's a rather unique and somewhat cynical way to do a story with prophecies, and I thought it was brilliant. But I still didn't like how easy everything was. Basically, there's a lot of conveniences which do have in-story reasons, so they make sense in terms of the plot, but you may or may not like that. So having said all of that, should you read it? Is it the greatest science fiction novel ever written? And what sort of person will actually like this book? In answer to the second question, this book is definitely in my top 3 science fiction novels I've ever read. But that's not saying much because I've only read 3 science fiction novels, and this would be number 3. So maybe I'm not really the best person to answer that question. Sorry about that. So let's try to answer the first question. Should you read it? If I'm being honest, Dune wouldn't be that high on my recommendations of books that you should check out immediately. Don't get me wrong, I don't hate it. I love some parts of the book. The world building is honestly mesmerizing. There's so much breadth and depth, and it makes you want to explore for hours, which explains the Quinn's Ideas rabbit hole that I went down after finishing this book. I think the writing style is unique and serves the purposes of this book really well. But the fact that I didn't feel any attachment to any of the characters bothered me a lot. One of my favorite things about a book is being deeply and personally invested in character journeys, and I didn't feel that here. Instead, there was a lot of discussions about philosophy and ecology and human nature that I just couldn't fully grasp, to be honest. For example, Paul spends a lot of time thinking about the race consciousness. What the hell does that mean? I really tried, but it made no sense to me. It sounds like something the architect probably said in the second Matrix movie, and that's just one example out of many. I'm really tempted to recommend this book to you so that you can read it and then tell me what the hell race consciousness means. Basically, I appreciated this book for what it is, and I think Frank Herbert succeeded in the kind of story that he was trying to tell. It just wasn't the kind of book that I prefer reading. The weird thing is though, I think if I reread it in a few months, my opinion might change now that I know what to expect from the story. It might make all of that philosophical stuff make more sense if I spend some time thinking about that whilst reading it. In this read-through, I was more focused on taking in the story and not that stuff, which is probably a mistake with Dune. So let's answer question 3. Who would I actually recommend this book to? The blurb actually mentions a few stuff that this inspired, and I think they're actually pretty good indicators. If you liked Matrix and enjoyed the talking and philosophy stuff in the second and third movies, then you'll enjoy this. If you liked Ender's Game, I've only watched the movie, then this might be right up your alley because Paul Atreides really reminds me of that kid. The blurb also mentions Star Wars, which I haven't seen, and Neuromancer, which I've never heard of. By the way, I would recommend not reading the full blurb for this book. It gives away way too much in my opinion. The other group I'd recommend this to are people who have seen the trailer for the Dune movie and want to get hyped. I feel like some of the character problems I had could be fixed in the movie, and Denis Villeneuve can definitely showcase the epic magnitude of this world. And finally, if you just want a book with fantastic world building, then read Dune to get a sense of the basis for the Dune universe, and then go watch Quinn's videos about the other books. So that's pretty much all I have to say about Dune. This has been the hardest book for me to talk about in a clear, concise, and coherent way. But if you watched up to here anyway, then smash that subscribe button for more weekly reviews. At the moment, I've just finished The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, so hopefully a fun and interesting video about that book soon. I'm zooming through Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson at the moment, and there'll be an interesting style of review for that coming out as well. And finally, I've borrowed some Terry Pratchett, Mistborn, and Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. All of these reviews in the upcoming weeks. Let me know your thoughts on Dune in the comments below. If you're going to talk spoilers, then please try to use a spoiler warning. Also give me your recommendations for more science fiction novels I should try out. As always, don't forget to do all of that YouTube stuff, like, share, the bell icon, you know the gist of it. Thanks for watching, till next week, see ya!